比較技術性嘅講座，交易之道，由技術分析講起。咁今日嘅互動嘉賓咧就有 Darren Chu，咁 Darren 咧就係 Tradable Patterns 嘅創辦人啦，佢而家 base 喺新加坡。Hello Darren，早晨。
早晨，Ed。
係，咁啊要講聲差唔多恭喜發財係咪？
恭喜發財，新年快樂！我因為以前喺加拿大出世長大，都好多時每年都唔知道新年幾時開始，所以頭先我都要問下正式開始慶祝係邊一日？因為每年唔同嘛，所以好易忘記呢個好重要嘅日子。不過而家因為住喺新加坡啦，呢邊就比較多人慶祝。其實本地嘅華人通常都慶祝起碼2個星期，所以就都幾有氣氛咯。如果有得參加呢啲本地嘅朋友活動，我唔知你哋喺即係以前喺香港會唔會遇過啲撈氣嘅慶祝？咁新加坡就用撈氣，即係呢個廣東話嘅講法，撈啲
風生水起，
蔬菜係咁就越揈得高、撈得高嘅呢啲食物，越向接近你個屋嘅頂，越好玩。但係就當然整到周圍烏煙瘴氣，不過就係咯，當一個 tradition 咯。
OK，好，咁今日咧，我哋不如we can switch back into English. I know you have a tough time communicating in Cantonese. Anyways, we are gonna talk first of all about Tradable Patterns, which is the company that you founded a couple of years ago. It's based on 技術分析 technical analysis. Can you briefly tell us what your company does and what you are doing now in Singapore?
Yeah, so I started Tradable Patterns 9.5 years ago, actually coming on to 10. And this was after I left corporate. So I used to work for ICE, and ICE, of course, Intercontinental Exchange bought NYC Life. So I'm actually from the exchange world, used to work at Life, which is LYFFE, and London International Financial Futures Exchange. Basically, the derivatives arm for the New York Stock Exchange group. But ICE bought that out. I continued working for ICE for a bit, and then eventually I came out, created Tradable Patterns, which is a web-based content business where I've been publishing technical analysis reports on a variety of futures markets, FX pairs, which are generally the more liquid ones. So I cover basically the most popularly traded retail-oriented futures markets, such as S&P 500, NASDAQ 100, the commodities like WTI crude, nat gas, gold, and quite a few FX pairs, the majors and the yen crosses. So I was basically providing daily reports on Bloomberg Within FactSet and Interactive Brokers right up until June last year, and then I shifted my format a little bit where I basically dropped off the coverage around you can call it the cross asset products on Monday through Friday. I just don't have time because I have an anchor client who is basically a food conglomerate, kind of like a Nestle, but very big, and asked me to produce daily reports on coffee, cocoa, and sugar futures. So that's all I do in the mornings every day for this one institutional client, but with the idea that I can resell the same content to Starbucks or to any other food conglomerate. It could be for Hong Kong, it could be Vita Soy, for instance, right? Because they buy a lot of sugar for their drinks. So my analysis basically helps these physical buyers and sellers of the underlying commodity decide what price to acquire the underlying food ingredients for whatever they need to manufacture, right? So in the case of my client, of course, they make things like chocolate bars or cookies, and so they have to buy all the raw ingredients for making such products, and they of course wholesale the products through the supermarket chains and so forth. So that's, yeah, that's what I do primarily with tradable patterns, and I'm kind of involved with some other VC and hedge funds, but that's kind of a side discussion.
Okay.
I think with tradable patterns, basically, having been focused on just the soft commodities on the weekdays since last year June, I've moved whatever cross asset coverage that I used to have daily to a once a week format. So I still have some coverage around the S&P 500 and the FX pairs like the euro US dollar or dollar yen, but it's got a rotation where I only cover three markets from my basket of watch list markets. So the basket's maybe 20 markets and change. So each
Mm.
Sunday I'll take three, which I find the most interesting, that I'll write TA for this coming week's market expectations. And a lot of times I look at, of course, what news flows expected for the coming week. So it's not that I wouldn't read the news. I, of course, read the fundamentals, but I just don't write about the fundamentals because there are many who are, of course, better positioned to do that, and there's no need for me to reinvent the wheel. I have readers who come specifically to my content just for the TA.
Mm. Okay, so I'm not gonna drill into the content of your website, which you do update every day. You have an institutional client, but specifically, maybe we can focus on a few things regarding the market outlook in 2024. How many
Yeah.
times will
So
U.S. Fed cut in 20? What do you think?
Okay, so the Fed basically gave the expectation back in December that there will be three cuts this year, but the market, as implied by the Fed Fund futures, how that trades, has indicated that it believes that there will be seven cuts, six or seven. Okay, so the first cut is widely expected to be in March 19th, I believe it is,
Mm.
but there
That's
will
the FOMC
be.
meeting, right?
Yeah, well, there's an FOMC meeting today. Well, tonight, 2 a.m. So a little past midnight, Singapore, Hong Kong
Oh,
time,
okay. You use Singapore
and
time. Yeah.
I guess it's, yeah, or I guess it's 3 a.m. now with time shift. But basically, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time
Yes,
on
that's
New
usually
York's Wednesday. Yeah,
yeah.
so that's when there's going to be a rate pause as the market expects. So if there is a cut, then of course that's unexpected, and then that's going to send some signals. Basically, if the market thinks the Fed's cutting too aggressively, then that, well, okay. So on the one hand, some market participants like the fact that the cuts are uh, just around the corner. But then if the cuts end up being too aggressive, then that signals to the market that the the Fed thinks the economy is too weak. And so if the economy is too weak, then maybe that suggests that the U.S. equities need to sell off quite a bit from where they are.
Mm.
And so, of course, it's strange how the market interprets these Fed cut actions differently depending on the time of the year, depending on the point in the cycle that you're at, right? And so, if all of a sudden the market starts
Mm.
interpreting the Fed cuts in a negative way instead of a
Mm.
positive way, then of course all this froth that we have in the S&P 500 Nasdaq ends up
Mm.
coming off, right?
Do you think there's an exhaustion top? Some technical people say, we are trading, of course, S&P, um, tech, they are really at all-time high. So when it drops, it pops, kind of. Do you think this would happen?
Well, so if you just look at the Magnificent Seven, which you alluded to, well, five of them are predominantly driving the action of the Magnificent Seven, and the Magnificent Seven are overall constituting such a large
Okay,
weighting.
not a lot of people know what the Magnificent Seven is. Maybe we can talk about these stocks. That includes
Yeah,
Apple,
yeah.
Microsoft, I think
Apple,
Netflix,
Amazon.
Tesla, Google,
Yeah, yeah,
Meta, which is Facebook. Did I
yeah.
miss one? What else?
Yeah, I think that's 7. Yeah. So there used to be term FANGs used a lot, and
Yeah,
I guess because the group grew, they had to they had to rename it. So Magnificent Seven, of course, is
yeah.
just a name of an old movie, I think from
Oh,
1960. But of course now that term or name is used to refer to those 7 stocks. And
right.
so
I
of
missed
those 7
Nvidia
stocks,
just now. Nvidia.
oh, okay, Nvidia, yeah. So
Yeah,
I guess the weakest of those 7 has been Tesla. So Tesla had some, I guess,
some issues really.
disappointing fourth
Yeah.
quarter guidance that they gave
Mm,
previously, and so it's trading under 200. But if you look at the AI related stocks, which is pretty much every other stock in that Magnificent Seven, right? I
mm,
mean, even when it comes to Netflix, you could argue that well, there's some AI that's used in the perhaps in the software that suggests as in their website, which suggests uh, the next videos that you should maybe consider, right? I'm
mm,
not sure if that's being driven by AI
mm.
at all, but I would
Yeah.
assume there's some AI there. But I haven't
Definitely
looked
strong
into
sales
Netflix.
for Netflix. If
Yeah.
you take a look at, I think they made some announcement in the last quarter. They have a more than expected subscription.
Okay. Yeah. So I because I'm consumed by I guess a lot of things.
Mm,
Which I just briefly alluded to. I do a bunch of things, I guess relating to basically VCs and hedge funds and the startup ecosystem. Because my own company, Trueable Patterns, was a startup, so I started attending all these events for startups and meeting a lot of VCs, and I guess that's another aspect of why my attention is drawn to technology, but more at
mm,
the startup level, not so much at the listed company level. But if we're to talk about just the technicals once again, it's super overextended on most of the Magnificent Seven, right? I would say all of them except for Tesla, right? Except
mm.
with Tesla, you have a bit of negative or bearish momentum if you're to look at a monthly chart, just looking at the recent monthly candlesticks. But I guess looking at this week, this is a super busy week with earnings. Okay, so Microsoft has uh, I guess started leading the pack there, and I guess we of course have the FOMC that we were referring to, and I guess overall the big question, going back to the global macro question is, does inflation continue to drop, or do we get this persistent stickiness around this current range? Inflation has fallen, of course, if you're to just believe the figures that come out. So the PCE is what the Fed prefers to use as opposed to the CPI. And you have core CPI, but basically the PCE, I believe it's the price consumer expenditure. And look, it's come off a lot, but again, if the average person just goes to the grocery store, goes to restaurants, and I'm talking about in North America, I'm talking about in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and you can name any number of other tier one sort of capital market centers or big cities where you visited recently, and I'm pretty sure the inflation is more than 3% on the food, and uh, I just don't think most people who are experiencing that level of inflation, at the grocery store or a restaurant level, believe those numbers, and so again, uh, consumer habits are formulated based on what they believe will impact their wallet, right? Their household spending and savings, right? And so I think there's a disconnect for sure,
I
right?
don't
For a lot of
see
people.
too much of an inflation, honestly, in Taiwan, where I am right now. I'm here for another day. But in Singapore, where you live right now, do you see there is substantial inflation? Like a carton of milk, how much does it cost? It's the Singapore currency almost at par with the Canadian. I don't know. I
Correct.
didn't even check.
Correct. Yeah, yeah, it's roughly the same. And so look, I haven't bought milk recently, but it's usually around probably look, if you're buying healthier milk from Australia, okay, whole milk,
Mm,
let's just say less processed, maybe it's $9, $8 for well, for a 2 liter. For a 1 liter, maybe it's
wow,
seven or so.
$8 Sing.
So
Wow. So it's like $8 Canadian
yeah,
for 2 liters.
yeah. I mean, yeah. Usually when it's on sale, it's maybe two 1 liter cartons for I don't know, $11 or something. But look, I'm not a regular purchaser of milk. But what I
Mm,
would say is I was in Taiwan as well for 11 days. Actually, I of course I can't really compare
mm,
uh, the price levels there to whatever it was the year before. So because I hadn't visited
mm.
prior to this recent trip since maybe 2015. Okay, so
Okay.
the inflation is less in Taiwan, but I would say in the big cities of capital market centers where a lot of, and it's
Mm,
not just driven by foreigners moving in. Some of course some of the inflation is due to that, right? But it's also some of the policies of some of the central banks that have unleashed this inflation. Um, I think obviously gas prices are kind of key to look at for the U.S. consumer. Okay, so not just the U.S. but in North America in general, because there are so many drivers, right? They're more dependent on their own cars to get around,
mm,
right? Because the mass transit isn't as good as in Hong Kong or Singapore, right? So the gas prices were way off the charts in the States. They were at record highs last year, or maybe early last year, right? And then of course they kind of came off. But yeah, I would say now the big questions, of course, is around inflation is what happens on the geopolitical side, right? What happens with respect to the Red Sea uh, conflict, which let's just call it the Middle East conflict, right? So
Yeah, yeah. Why don't
it
we
could
start
broaden.
with
Yeah,
Israel and Hamas? A lot of people think
yeah,
that's not going to be blown out of proportion. It's under control, but there's no ceasefire.
yeah,
I don't know whether that affects the commodity prices that much,
yeah,
but from a
yeah.
stock market perspective, I don't think it really affects that much.
Yeah, so the market has shrugged off a lot of what's happening there. When I say the market, I mean the equity market.
Mm,
But if you look at WTI crude or Brent crude, they actually have bounced off their recent lows from say a month or 2 months ago. Okay, so the low for Brent crude or WTI crude, which they trade um, a little bit apart with that spread between the two prices, but their correlation is fairly high, meaning if Brent goes up by $1, WTI goes up by almost the same percentage
mm,
moved. Okay, so uh, WTI is more, of course, a US benchmark, right? And it's more a speculator's futures contract. But if we're to just look at the impact from the recent tension in the Middle East, okay, we've had, of course, three US, let's just say, military servicemen killed in a recent attack that the
mm.
US blames on Iran. Iran, of course, isn't acknowledging that they're involved.
Yeah.
And they might not be, right? I don't know. All I would say is these attacks were, of course, done in retaliation for
Mm,
a whole host of other reasons that
right.
takes a whole show to discuss. But basically, I think what we have is uh, crude oil prices and gold prices reflecting, baking in some of that tension,
Mm,
and the U.S. equity markets are discounting or ignoring or just not factoring in
not
well
yet. At
the
least not yet. Mm,
tension.
mm. Um, yeah. So maybe a little bit about the prolonged war between Ukraine and Russia. It's
Yeah.
Do you think this affects any market at all right now?
Well, so it affects some of the when we're talking about oil, it
Mm,
affects this. Uh, well, okay, so it affects Brent crude more than it would affect WTI because Brent is basically a North Sea contract. Okay, so the North Sea being the region kind of near the UK, but also the Scandinavian countries.
mm,
That's why Norway's got so much money in its sovereign
mm.
wealth fund, being the biggest in the world because of all that oil, right? But
Good social welfare
there's
too for
also,
Norway. If you move
pardon
there,
me.
good social welfare. Norway,
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah,
Slavic
yeah, yeah,
countries.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, yeah. So of course, there's a lot of things are taken care of, right? Because
Mm,
that royalty revenue that the government receives from uh, whatever the oil giant there is called. I think it might be Stat Oil or something. I can't remember if it's that company or if I'm mixing up with another one.
mm,
But anyways, there's also of course a natural gas contract that has become the European benchmark, which is a Dutch natural gas contract. Okay, so uh, it's not like it's not like the natural gas only comes from the Netherlands, but that specific contract has kind of become the benchmark or the one that energy traders in Europe pay most attention to. And so whatever tension occurs in Ukraine, and of course that's ongoing, right? It hasn't ended. But if that conflict embroils a broader region, if for instance Poland gets involved, a lot of those refugees fleeing Ukraine have ended up in Poland. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but
mm,
it's well over a million. And I'm probably way understating the actual number. But anyways, there's a lot of tension that involves a few of the neighboring countries. Belarus as well is of course a Russian ally, and so if a few of these other countries get pulled in, and
mm,
I guess the main concern has been that uh, this of course is sort of along a few very critical oil pipeline routes or natural gas pipeline routes, right? There's a lot of transiting of those commodities through Ukraine. Ukraine's also described as a breadbasket for Europe. It grows more, well, it used to. I don't know about now, but it
mm,
it was the biggest producer of wheat for Europe for a very long time, and so that affected the global wheat benchmark prices on the CME wheat futures, for instance, right, to some degree, even though we're talking about wheat all the way in Ukraine, but yeah, it used to export, and I don't know how much of it has continued or resumed rather the exporting because of all the damage to some of the warehouses and those silos that contain the grades. But yeah, it grows a lot of other things. So it's critical, I guess, on a lot of those commodity prices on the futures as well as where there are no futures traded for the commodities. But I think right now if you look at gold, the price of gold probably reflects a little bit, at least a little bit of what's happening in Ukraine. Gold is near a record high, right? And of course, gold reflects a lot of what's happening on the global macroeconomic side of things, where we of course have the expectation for continued, at least from the gold market, as indicated by the price, right? We have some demand for that safe haven role that gold traditionally, historically has played, right? And so I think some of that is the expectation, not just for uh, a flare up or an increase in the tension between Israel and its neighbors, and the neighbors there aren't just the Houthis, whatever rebels that are launching attacks on U.S. military installations, right? It's also potentially nation states like Iran being much bigger than Iraq, much more powerful. It's basically absorbed a lot of a lot of the power that Iraq used to have in that region. And of course, you have Turkey, whose leader Erdogan has been quite vocal on his criticisms of this Gazan incursion, by the Israeli Defense Force, right, where over 300,000 Gazans have been killed, right? So, and that's probably as of November or December, but more than half of which are civilians, right? Children, elderly people, women, right? Much less so than the Hamas fighters, or than those that the IDF was criticized for not being a little more targeted and going after, right? So there's there's a lot of tension from the neighboring, not just Arab states, but I guess primarily those that have historically aligned, but even those that haven't historically aligned with with Iran. For instance, Saudi Arabia has made some I wouldn't call them warnings, but of course they are trying to sort of play both sides of that. Of course, some of these trading partners take precedence in the contribution to the Saudi economy through the importing of oil from them, right? And so they can't be too critical of some of the buyers of their oil, but at the same time, you can see the rift between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. From not just from this current conflict in Israel, but it's kind of been a work in progress for a while.
Darren, we're running a little bit over time. I just want to ask one last thing. Focus on Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China. Now, I don't know whether you were in Taiwan during the Taiwanese presidential election. So the DPP, 民進黨, right? The incumbent government, they will continue for another 4 years. I guess the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, they don't like the incumbent government of Taiwan. Now, in Cantonese, let me say, they always refer Taiwan as the 台灣地區領導人, 台灣地區領導人. So they don't really take a look at Taiwan as a sovereign state. Now, Chinese New Year is coming, and in Taiwan, for universities, actually, they have holidays. They don't celebrate Christmas. I was in near Saimunding, so I see a lot of young people celebrating already and all that. Do you think China will do anything aggressive? I mean, to attack Taiwan in the near future, in the very near future, because they always warn about trying to have a Taiwan to be part of mainland, right? So reunification by force, so to speak. Do you think this will happen this year or next? I know you're a technical guy. You don't look into the geopolitical side as much, but just want to get
I mean, not for Taiwan. I watched the geopolitical aspect of much of what's happening in the Western world, but I guess for Taiwan specifically, so I'll just say what I felt based on talking to a few local acquaintances, new
because
friends.
you also visited Taiwan recently.
So I was there, and of course, for 11 days on vacation. And when I
Where did you go? I
mentioned
didn't
to,
see you. Were you there in around Christmas time, or?
yeah, well, so I landed on the 22nd of December, and I was there till to the first New Year's Day, and then I went to Hong Kong. But a couple of the people I spoke to were visibly agitated and quite upset by the current situation with China, and they do they do really resent whatever whatever signaling has been coming from the Xi administration. And with
Xi
respect
Jinping's
to my
administration.
conversation,
Xi Jinping's administration, you're saying?
yeah, I mean they they weren't. I guess they weren't saying specifically the current regime, but in general, they are very, of course, opposed to being taken over. But the, I guess, I guess in terms of how likely they fear a takeover, they well, okay, so of course I only spoke to a few people about this, but a few people, of course, just shrugged it off and don't think it's likely.
Mm.
Uh, if you look at some of the polls, some of the surveys, it appears like the majority of people, more than half, actually, are more concerned about economic prospects versus the imminent
Mm.
takeover by China as as the number one concern. And
Yeah.
if I'm to kind of switch gears and just refer to maybe some conversations I've had with mainland Chinese in Singapore, a couple of them who I've spoken to, well, actually more people in Singapore uh, can be sort of used for this sampling because I've lived here for 13 and a half years, but
Mm.
more recently in the last, call it 12 months, I've had this conversation with well over a dozen people from China,
Okay.
and they do feel that there will be a moderately high probability for hot war
For
takeover.
what? For attack?
I mean, they feel there's a moderately high. Well, so
Mm.
maybe some of this is lost in translation, but because my Mandarin isn't that good either. But basically, there there's a preparation that many of
For
them
war.
and their families or business contacts have for a
Mm.
potential conflict. And so there's diversification, of course, in investments and business lines. And of course, this isn't news, right? Like we see this everywhere. That's why there's so much money coming into Singapore from China, right? So
Mm.
nothing new, but it's
But
been
Singapore still has
accelerating.
very close ties with Taiwan. That's when they do the military drill. They
Yeah,
send
yeah, yeah.
send
They,
the
they
young
do
people
well. They
to
do
Taiwan.
joint training for,
Yeah.
I think, the NS, the National Service. I don't know which groups within the National Service here participates on that joint training, but in the
Mm.
past, many of my Singaporean friends have told me, actually, even recently in December, someone told me that part of his training was in Taiwan. So of course, there's that close cooperation there.
Yeah. Well, I hope they keep it this way. I mean, sending more
Yeah.
young people. You guys have this military service. You don't because you are not Singaporean yet, right?
Yeah.
Past the age.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, yeah. Well, they wouldn't want me. I would probably not be a very good fighter, but I would just fight or something. But look, I think the reality is the probability assigned by most political analysts seems to be fairly low. The economy in China is quite weak relative to the
Oh
last
yes.
30 years, as we all know. So with that massive debt load that they have, the massive GDP slowdown, the aging demographics, the massive unemployment, is the Chinese administration now really in any position to get embroiled in such costly exercise? One of the views expressed by someone I know from China is that, well, with all the unemployed people in China, and this is kind of dark, but this is just something I'll share. Is his view is that actually, if the regime administration decides to go to, let's say, a military conflict, it actually allows them to, well, to reduce the youth unemployment, if you know what I mean. So it's not a good prospect for the young people there, right, in China, who might have to serve or who might just get caught up, right? It's not good for anyone except for those who make money from selling the military equipment uh, to to the governments, right? So it's actually quite a sad situation. War is, right. It always is a select few that benefit immensely at the expense of those who are on the front line and who end up as collateral damage.
Hmm. Okay. Well, thank you, Darren. This is the first time we do in 2024. I hope I can get you on my show again this year. And thank you once again.
Thanks for having me, Ed, and looking forward to speaking with you and your community.
Okay, great.